Well, good evening, everybody. Again, it's Chris here from the Stop Cafe in Muir, Alberta. And as promised, I have a very special guest tonight, Dr. Gary Davidson. So it is a fairly significant day for me today. It's January 24th. I'm pretty sure it's 4 years to the day since I first met Gary. Gary kind of caught wind of what was going on, and I was open for business at the Stop Cafe, and he had to come out and meet me and see what was going on and have a little chat with me. So it's very that I don't want to say the stars aligned, but I suppose it was part of a plan that today was the day that he released his report that was commissioned by the Premier regarding how the government handled COVID, what they did, what went right, what went wrong, how we can do better in the future, and what we have to do now. And as many of you may already know, I mean, I've shared little portions of this. One of the recommendations was to stop what they're doing, stop what we're doing collectively as a society, get some more information, figure it out, and then make a plan going forward, which is always prudent in matters of, well, pretty much anything. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on Gary. He's taking time while he's traveling. He's on the road. He's hitting the skyways tomorrow. And he decided he's going to take some time and join us anyway while he's traveling. So welcome, Dr. Gary Davidson, and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, you bet, Scott. Chris, you bet. Happy to be here. And yeah, I remember that day when we first met, and it was quite a while ago now. A lot of things have changed, that's for sure.
Yeah, the world is a bit of a different place now, folks. Just so you know, Gary's traveling, so there might be an interruption here or there, but we'll deal with it, make the best of it, and of course, Kerry will work his magic and edit up the video when we're done. But I did want to make sure that we got Gary on as soon as we can, because what he's done in the last couple of years is monumental, and this is you've really shaken things up, and you've done a fantastic job sticking to your principles. So maybe, do you want to just give people an idea of what it was that you were hired to do and how you went about that?
Sure. So the report that came out came out of a mandate that came out of the Premier's office in November 2022. To the health group, and what we were asked to look at was basically the data. We weren't there to see who did what. We're not looking for fault. We're not looking at decisions we did. And so we looked at where the data came from. Did it work the way we thought it did? So that was kind of what we looked at. And then there was areas that we then looked at with the data. And so one of them was data flow and governance. So, where did it come from and how did that all work? And then how did the governance work? And when I say governance, I don't mean the government of Alberta. It's who regulated how the data moved. We looked at immunity or infection, originated immunity. So if you got sick, you build your own immunity. So how is that factored into our response? They're looking at the treatments that were available and then some that weren't allowed. So we looked at both sides of those. We looked at, we call NPIs, which are non-pharmaceutical interventions. So that includes masking and lockdowns and things like that. There was modeling. So modeling was used to kind of project where we thought things were going. And then how do we use that to, move forward? making sure then there's the governing bodies. And so as a physician, I believe 23 other colleges in Alberta over different medical bodies. So we looked at how they factored in to what the response was. So we looked at those different areas, and we looked at them all through the lens of where did the data come from, who chose the data, or who collected the data, who analyzed it, who applied it, and how they applied, that kind of thing. We weren't looking for fault. We just want to know how it worked. And then when we looked at how it worked, did it work well, or was there things that could be done better? And that was really the point of this. And so that's what our mandate was, and that's how we did it. I guess that's the methodology of it. So does that answer your question, Chris?
It does, yeah. So that sounds like it was a pile of work. And from what I'm reading here, you had quite the team working with you on this. Like, there's some pretty big names. As a matter of fact, one of them is now, he is to be appointed pending Senate approval to the National Institute of Health in the United States.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was a contributor on the report. Very, very valuable insight. And yes, it just, world leader in this area. So we had a number of them like that were, world leaders in their area, and depended on their expertise, and it made a huge difference, for sure.
I had an opportunity to meet Dr. Bhattacharya in Victoria. We spoke at a We Unify conference together, and he's just a fantastic individual, as are you. So with all of this work that went into this, what's the crux of the result of this? What was the kind of, this is where we're at and what we need to do?
Right. So I guess the thing that really struck us is that we had an Alberta pandemic plan that was largely set up by Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, which was made in Alberta for Alberta. It dealt with all aspects of society. It dealt with, the economics and every, but it was kind of discarded, or not kind of discarded, completely discarded in favor of of one that was handed down from somewhere above. And it wasn't from outside influence. And so I think that what we need to go back to is made in Alberta approach, and that works well for the people, and it has to be well-rounded. We can't just look at health, because if you look at Alberta's data, when we locked down in April 2020, or we locked down March 2020, there's a massive spike in accidental deaths and overdose and that kind of thing. Some of them weren't accidental, but that's what they're called. Massive increase. More people died of that than they did COVID. And those numbers have never come back to baseline to this day. And we haven't had a lockdown for a couple of years now. So it had huge impact, so that we maybe didn't foresee coming. So I think that we have to have a more rounded approach is my feeling from it. So I just, some of the things we saw, and then made some recommendations based on that.
So when this all occurred, like when we were going through all these things, when we were going through the restrictions, you were actually on the other side of this conversation. You were one of those who were taking, basically orders from the top. And it seems like it didn't really make a heck of a lot of sense. Do you want to maybe share what your experience was during that time of, early 2020, kind of in 2021? As what was your title? You were the manager for the ER departments of Central Alberta. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So for the Central Zone, I was clinical lead for emergency medicine. And yeah, it was a job I enjoyed. And I was starting to have some problems with how things were being done. They weren't making sense to me. I was reading very keenly Pfizer's own research material coming off their studies. And I couldn't understand why we were doing what we were doing. So in vaccine research, you look at things called all-cause mortality, because whenever you come up with a new drug, you're not if the drug treats, say, heart disease. The only thing you don't just look at poor outcomes for heart disease. You look at poor outcomes for anything, because the side effect for a drug for heart disease might have to do with another system of the body. So you have to look at something we call all-cause mortality. And the all-cause mortality in the treatment arm or the vaccine arm of the vaccines was worse than the people that didn't get anything. And so that wasn't a good idea. They were saying it was safe and effective long-term, but the study was only 2 months long. There's 44,000 people recruited, 22,000 in each arm. At the end of 2 months, they gave the people that were in the control arm, the unvaccinated, vaccine. So now you can't track anything at that point. It's all done. So you couldn't make any claims of long-term safety. To say that was just confusing to me. There was no pregnant women that were vaccinated in the study at all. If you were pregnant, you weren't allowed to get the shot. But out of the 22,000 people who got the shot, 270 became pregnant. This is Pfizer's own material. Out of the 270 that became pregnant, they lost 238 charts. That's 88% of them. That made no sense. How do you lose them? The follow-up when you're
Just give it a minute, folks. It'll come back.
well, guys, you can't do this. And so, yeah, we had discussions with leadership, and if you work somewhere, you got to do what you're told, and I understand that. And it came to the point where actually I couldn't from that position. So it was fine. It was a choice I made, and stayed on as emergency position for a while longer, and then I wouldn't get the vaccines in October of 2021, and that was the end of working there altogether, and that was a choice I made. But so I was a little bit on the other side of things. I was treating people in the community for COVID, and with stuff that we were talking about, and it's in the report we put ivermectin, for instance, and I prescribed ivermectin hundreds of times, and I've read it all. I studied it very well, prescribe it. I know how it works. By far the safest drug I've ever prescribed. It's like I say, by 10 things deadly ivermectin, like Advil, Tylenol, aspirin, Benadryl, Gasline antifreeze, you name it, just about anything in there. Probably energy drinks, probably all more dangerous than ivermectin. So I didn't understand what was going on with that. That made no sense to me. But I prescribed it legally, as I should, with prescriptions and through pharmacies, and wasn't handing out horse paste or whatever was going on. And I had no ill effects, and it seemed to really help people. So that's what I was doing. And when we weren't allowed to prescribe it anymore, September 22nd, 2021, then I could no longer use them. How that went. But so I was kind of on the other side of all this stuff and had a lot of questions about it. And so that's how I went through COVID. A little different than most people.
Is there any other time that you can recall in your career where you were, threatened or persecuted or even damn near crucified for participating in science as a scientist and using off-label drugs to treat things?
I watching people die in the department in front of me. Some days it was horrendous. With COVID, our 2020, our visits down 30%. We actually cut a shift off. Like we actually let one doc go home every day because we didn't have enough work. So it was a totally different thing. And so, but I'd never, going through that pandemic, Ebola scare, if you remember, We all had to learn to Ebola if it ever came to North America. So we had other scares that came, but it was never anything like this. I didn't quite understand it, to be honest with you.
So you went through this from that side, and then you find yourself in a position where it's you who is being, you were commissioned to ask the questions and find out what happened. One of the things that I noticed in there is that there was a recommendation that the Alberta government stop using the COVID-19 vaccines until we find out what's going on. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
So in the paper, you'll see a very large study that was done in the Scandinavian countries, and they recruited about 2.1 million people in the study, which showed that the risk-benefit profile was absolutely against getting the vaccine if you're under 50 years old without some serious comorbidity. So in those countries, you can't get it unless a doctor prescribes it because you need it for some reason. And so we read that study very carefully. We researched it, like I say, read through Pfizer's own material. We've got the V-Safe data on the vaccines, which came from CDC. CDC conscripted 10,000 people that got the vaccine to write all of their symptoms every day, everything from mild symptoms to severe symptoms. And they wouldn't release it. They actually had to be sued to release it. And we got the material, and it showed that 7.7% of people needed medical attention after being vaccinated. I mean, so it didn't sound like a very good product. So that, along with the Scandinavian study, and then there's jurisdictions in the world that have actually come along and said that, not just the Scandinavian countries. And so we looked at what they were using for research, and largely it comes from the manufacturer's data itself. Like, that's enough to show you that it's not, it just didn't make sense to us. So that's what we recommended. So that's where we're at on that.
So that is completely contrary to what the media told us and what politicians and government told us about safe and effective and scientific consensus. So I also read an article in the Globe and Mail today, and the reporter I use the word loosely, journalist that wrote it, she framed the report as just some kind of wacky conspiratorial thing. I mean, this journalist must know better than a dozen scientists spending a year and a half going through hard data. What do you say to the reporters that are acting that way?
I just that might be the same one that contacted me today. I just encourage you to read the report, and we can have a fulsome conversation on it, because we're not going to attack calling people conspiracy theorists, her or I, but just read it, and I'd love to sit down and say, show me where we missed something, because if we did, then it needs to be corrected, and then if they missed something, that's something that they need to look at themselves. But science, there's no such thing as consensus in science. That makes no sense. Science is about questioning everything, experimenting, and proving whether it's true or not. That's science. Consensus is a religion idea, and I don't think it belongs in this field, personally. But so we want to question, we want to ask. We do have to do it in a way that doesn't harm patients and populations. That's completely understandable. But the dialogue between high-level scientists and those that knew should have been allowed to flow freely, which it seemed when we did our research that didn't happen. And so we didn't point fingers at the government. The government made the decisions they had under a lot of pressure with data that seemed to be incomplete. And so the question, so we did a data review. Where did the data come from? Who's giving it to them? Who's analyzing it? Who's applying it? And that wasn't the politicians. That was people before them that were giving them recommendations on which they were reviewing laws, the aspect.
Would it be fair to say that if we had followed the procedures and the plan that we had before this, rather than abandoning everything and taking talking points from bureaucrats, things would have been better?
If we'd followed the original pandemic plan, well, hindsight's always 2020. I have read the pandemic plan we had in place before, and possibly would have worked better. Impose any of the restrictions. People were voluntarily allowed to do what they felt was best. I've talked to the medical director for Sweden, who was in charge at the time, and had a personal conversation about this with him, and how they like that. And answers, and I think governments can do is sit down and do reports like this and review differently, and that's the best way to find out what really did work best or what would work best next time. So that's hindsight's really good, but it was difficult times. There's no argument, and I don't fault the decisions that were made.
Well, I got to say you're a better man than me, because I'm a little bit on the other side of that. I find fault with some of the actions that certain people took, and it's I know that I have to extend them a measure of grace, as I've been extended myself. But this report, how well was it received by the Alberta government?
That's going to take time some of us are all seeing it at the same time here. I mean, I've been involved in it for 2 years now, so I know what it said, and I know it's said for a while. But I know that there's people in the government that are just still reading through it. There's quite a bit there, and so as they read through it, it'll be interesting to see what they say about it. I have to say it was very courageous of the Alberta government to say, let's do this. For better, for worse, let's review what happened and make sure we do it better next time. That's the way. That's the only way you can do it. I think it shows a lot of courage. So I appreciate that.
Well, one of the things I respect Danielle Smith tremendously for is her willingness to be a leader when the country is severely lacking one. She's been a leader in dealing with these issues. She's been a leader in even international relations. Like right now, she's fighting for the province. She's apologized to the people that have been harmed by the actions of the government, the preceding administration. And now she's released a report that she really didn't have to. I mean, this was something for her and for government to see, and she made the decision to make it public. And I'm very happy that she did that, because now people can look at the information. And folks watching, read it. Read the whole thing. I put the link up there to the Alberta government website. And if you feel like there's something more that we should do as a society to, for some accountability or prevent it from happening in the future, then we got to get together and do it. That's our job. Dr. Davidson's done his job in getting the information, getting the data. The Premier has done her job in being transparent and allowing us to see, what happened in the inner workings. And now it's up to us. So, Gary, what would you recommend people do with this information after they read it, and actually read it, not just skim it with their own preconceived biases and have emotional responses, but really read it and know it? What should they do with this?
Read it and understand the science behind it the best they can. Ask people that know, and don't make it a personal thing. Science is not personal. Science, it's either true or it isn't, regardless of what I think of it. So I can easily be wrong. That's what science is. And then I go and I look at it and I change. So I just say, same thing to everybody. I don't care what side of the fence they're on. I don't care what your position was during the pandemic. Read it, and if there's something in there that you think, well, that's good, I can take that away, excellent. If you think isn't useful, it's okay. Just leave it alone. And let's move on. Let's just have a really open, transparent debate, and let's really find out what entirely happened and go on from there.
That's some good advice. Now, you're being awfully humble about this, so let me just fix that. I want to extend my thank you to what you did throughout this whole time, Gary. I mean, you obviously devoted your life to helping people as a physician. And then when you saw something wrong, you stood up and you stood on your principles and in truth, and you did what you knew was right. And people that are watching, they may or may not know this. I know that you saved dozens, if not hundreds of lives with what you did in putting your career, your future, and your life on the line. I know that for sure. I watched it unfold. I followed this whole thing from the very beginning. And, I'm extremely grateful for what you've done and for the work that you put in getting this information out. So on behalf of me and likely most of the people that are watching tonight, and probably the majority of the province once they read this, thank you very much for your service to the province. And now I'm going to let you get some much deserved rest and spend some time with your family. But yeah, I don't think we could say thank you enough.
Well, I'm very honored to be asked to help and to have the opportunity to help, and that's what I want to do. So I appreciate it, and appreciate what you're doing as well, Chris.
Well, thank you. There you have it, folks. Dr. Gary Davidson released the report on how the government handled COVID with the restrictions, the mandates, lots of information on the vaccine, what's going on with that. Of course, the recommendation is to stop administering that and find out what's going on, get some proper testing done, and then decide where to go from there. And Gary, enjoy your time off, and I look forward to seeing you at the Whistle Stop Cafe in Mirror, Alberta. That looks a little bit different than last time you were there, but it's just as good. And looking forward to spending some more time with you.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Take care. Well, there you have it. Dr. Gary Davidson. His story is absolutely epic. My story is interesting. I'm a burger flipper that fought for my right to sell hamburgers and pour coffees for people. Gary Davidson is a physician who was willing to sacrifice everything he had worked for. And I know the story of how he got through medical school and stuff. That it wasn't easy for him. It wasn't a silver spoon thing. He worked for it. And he was willing to sacrifice that to do what he knew was right. And by doing that, he saved a lot of lives. Gary administered what was known, and I guess still known as the McCullough Protocol. Peter McCullough in the United States, Dallas, Texas, he's been on the show as well. He developed a protocol for early treatment of COVID-19 and saved thousands and thousands of lives. He published this information. It was known worldwide that it had a very, very high success rate. And our governments here in Canada and in Alberta scoffed at him, and they persecuted him. And instead of following the science like they told us to do here, they followed, I don't even know what they're following. They were doing things to people that were not beneficial to their health. And, Gary said that this was about the data and the statistics and what it looked like. When you look at that information, there's something much deeper, a much bigger problem than just a mask or a closure of a business to protect against a virus. And the issue is governments acting in a manner that is not in our best interests, acting in a manner where they forget that they work for us. And their job is to make sure, their job is to make laws on our behalf. Their job was never, ever to lock my business down. Their job was never to have teenagers beat up for playing hockey outside. That wasn't their job. And I'm very grateful to live in a province where at least some of our elected officials, of our politicians, have the balls to stand up and do the right thing. Because when you do that, just like what Gary did, the world gets better. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be, this major thing changing the world like what they're doing south of the border right now. It can be as simple as just standing up and saying, hey, you know what? This isn't right. And we really need to rethink this. So I hope that's the lesson from this. There's a lot more work to do, and I know there's going to be a lot more come from this. It's a very, very exciting time to be alive. And I'm looking forward to the day when there is either a very heartfelt and sincere apology or some much deserved accountability. Either way, it's going to be great. Thank you very much for staying up late with me. Sorry that the connection wasn't great. Gary's on his way to the airport, and he agreed to do that on the road, so it was the best we could do. But I wanted to make sure that on this day, 4 years to the day when Dr. Gary Davidson walked into the Whistle Stop Cafe, introduced himself, and encouraged me to stand up for myself and not back down from my principles. Today was the day to do this. So thanks for being with us. Now, let's get to work and fix this stuff. Good night. Meow. Even the cat knew it wasn't right. Jason Kenney should have known.